Here's your report.
Thanks, Jane. I wish I could hire a whole team of yous.
Try posting a job on LinkedIn. It's the world's largest professional network. Unlike resumes, LinkedIn gives a real-time view into a candidate's skills, experiences, and more.
Let's do it. You're irreplaceable, Jane, but another you would be great.
Find your perfect match with LinkedIn. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai iced coffee flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
I mean, I go down all these little rabbit holes when I'm thinking about it. That's one of the main things I've thought about for the last 3 or 4 years is this finding out more about these people and where I came from and how this all came to be. You know, it's not just a 1960s swing fest. It's my origin story. And, you know, I wish my mom would be okay with it. That would be a good thing, because it's the truth is out. She has to live with it now, and I'm embracing it. And if she was less shame-filled about it, she could understand the kind of poetry of it in a way. It's beautiful. You know, I got lucky. Like, I have a dad who loved me. I had a dad who's an artist who came to visit me and carried my baby picture. Mom told him he couldn't be part of my life. She said he didn't want to be part of my life, but who carries a child's baby picture in their wallet if they don't want to be part of their life? And who tells on their deathbed, you got to go find this person? He wanted to know me. He wasn't allowed to.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Most of the time, when I speak to people on the podcast, we learn that the reason they took the test was out of curiosity or for fun. Maybe they were given the DNA test as a gift from a friend or significant other. So imagine my surprise when I learned that this week's guest was given her Ancestry DNA kit by her mother. Welcome to Season 8 of DNA Surprises. In this week's episode, Julie shares how she uncovered the truth about her paternity after her mom gifted her a DNA test. She remembers her, quote, party people parents and a childhood spent around the world after they divorced and her mother remarried. As we often say on this podcast, DNA surprises can happen to anyone of any background. There are no rules about who can be rocked by the shocking results of a DNA test. Thank you for sharing your story, Julie.
My name's Julie. I am 60, about to turn 61, and I'm from upstate New York. Holy crap. It's gotta be a book someday, I tell you. You know, the usual. I always felt different. I was the oldest of 5 kids, my mom's first child, and I was born in 1963, January. Then I had a brother who was born about a year after me, and another brother and a sister and a brother. There's 12 years between the oldest and the youngest. So my parents were married about maybe 3 years before I was born, 3 or 4 years. Just never got along. They were totally different people. They married basically when they were like 18 and 21, as they did back then. My mom, she came from a small town. My dad was going to a private boarding school in that small town, and they met when they were teenagers, and mom, first guy she fell in love with, she wanted to get out of the house, and he proposed and they got married. I was the oldest and, first kid and first pancake. So they make all the mistakes, throw the first one away. First pancake's the one they burn.
Yep.
I had my little brother and we were close in age. We did everything together. I loved my dad, my birth certificate father. Totally adored him. We got along great. He was working all the time, and mom was like a stay-at-home mom. Her and I was always button heads. Totally contentious relationship, even from the get-go, because I think I was a challenging kid. I was just really opinionated and I guess smart, and I just saw everything, and I asked a lot of questions. And I don't think they like that. And I saw things and I would say, well, what was that? And try and find out more information than they wanted me to know. My parents were party people. They liked to have these crazy office parties at their house. And it was the 60s and lots of crazy shit. My brother and I would come downstairs after these parties and help ourselves to what was left in the glasses. Smoking cigarette butts. We were like 3 and 4 or something like that.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, we were bad. But yeah, I mean, it was the only childhood I know. So for me, that was just the way it was. It was just a weird little crazy thing. And then one year my mom said she didn't want to live in the city anymore. We were living in a suburb of Rochester. And she's like, I don't want to live in the city. Let's go live in the country, because she wanted to live in the country. So Dad found this old dilapidated farmhouse and he fixed it up for us. And we lived there for quite a while. And then I guess it was like 1969, 1970. My parents started like deciding about getting divorced. They were just fighting all the time. And a new man came into the picture. It happened to be a hitchhiker my dad brought home from work one day. And my mom and him started seeing each other. So that was my stepfather. He became my stepfather. He wasn't a good person. He was a little bit abusive. But so there's that. There's my dad, my birth certificate dad, my stepfather those were the dads I knew. Also, when we were living there, friends of the family would come by, people from the city that my mom knew, and they'd come visit. And I remember this one particular man came and he was very curious about me and my art, and he would talk to me, and he had a British accent. He smelled good, and he was kind. And I remember something about him. He was rather deaf in one ear, and he told me you have to speak in the other ear. And he had one leg that was a little bit shorter than the other, so he wore the little elevated shoes on one side. But he was such an interesting, kind person, and he gave me this little ammonite fossil, which I still have to this day. I have no idea how I kept it over the years, but it was a little like thing I remember. And one day I remember this conversation between him and my mom, and I was sitting there. I must have been about 7, and I heard him say, "Oh, my mom said, you think she looks like Christina?" And that man said, "She does, but I think she also looks like Frankie." And I looked at both of them. I'm like, "Who's Christina?" And he said, "Oh, Christina's my little girl." And my little brain was going like, why do I look like his little girl? And then I'm like, "Who's Frankie?" He's like, "That's my mother." Like, "I look like your mother?" I guess that shut the conversation down because they realized I understood what they were saying.
What did you think at that point? Were you like, is this guy my dad? Or were you just confused by what they were saying?
It never occurred to me. I'm like, how could I look like this person's child and mother? That, what does that mean? And then I guess mom and I had a conversation about it afterwards. She's like, "No, you look like me. You look just like me." And I do look a lot like my mom. And then I said, "Do I look like my dad?" But she wasn't thinking of the dad that I was thinking of. I was thinking of my birth certificate father. And she said, "Yeah, you do." And then I went up to my dad. I said, "Do I look like you, Dad? I don't know what I look like." I was like very confused. Like, you see that person you look like, and then the other person who made you you look nothing like them. It's such a strange, like, confusing thing. Like, why didn't I get, like, my brothers look like him, but why don't I? And I'd study people's faces. I'm fascinated with, like, looking at people's faces and finding out, like, who looks like who in the family.
Yeah. As a child, were you very conscious of the fact that you didn't look like your birth certificate father, or is it more upon reflection?
Upon reflection, it didn't really, like, bother me. He was my dad. I mean, he was a man, so perhaps that's why I didn't look like him. I have feminine features. So I thought, well, I don't know, maybe I look like a woman in his family somewhere, but he was an only child. So anyway, like, we ended up going to Mexico with my stepfather and my mom in a Volkswagen van, and my sister was born down there. And then we had to come back because she was born with a liver condition, so we had to get medical attention. So we moved to England for the socialized medicine. My stepfather was English too. So the weird thing is, I guess my mom was an Anglophile.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
She liked English dudes.
Yeah, and very, like, you know, you were very well traveled from childhood. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I lived on a farm for, I guess, the second 5 years of my life. First 5 was in a city. So then moving around was an experience that I treasure because I learned so much and it opened my eyes about, you know, different cultures and seeing the world, and kind of like planted the seeds for future adventures.
Yeah,
because I live on a bus now. I actually bought my own school bus and I converted it into a tiny home.
Oh, that's awesome. So you live in England, you see the world.
Mm-hmm. My mom and stepfather, my brothers, I had another brother who was born in England. We all lived in this farmhouse in a remote area. I was immersed in the culture over there. I went to a British school, a grammar school, and I had English friends, and I actually developed an English accent to kind of fit in. After a while, it was great because I had friends, I had a social life. I was living on a farm. It was fun. I mean, going home wasn't fun because I was not being treated very well by my stepfather, especially. But I was a little bit heartbroken because I felt like I lost my mom when she married him. And I just felt like also I was going through my tweens and my teens, and it was just weird and awkward, and I really missed my dad. He was in the States still, but he would come visit us, or we would go visit him. He would fly us over for the summer, so that was my reprieve. And I was able to spend time with my dad, who I loved. You know, he was such a good man. He was such a good dad. He was a dad. Like, that was his archetype. Yeah. He even was like a dad to my friends. Like, when he passed away a couple years ago, a lot of my friends came out of the woodwork and they just said, yeah, we remember Mr. Bill. He was such a great guy. He's like our dad too. And I'm like, yeah, he was like universal dad.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, I was lucky to have him. After England, I was like 15. We moved back to the States. And then when I was 16, I moved in with my dad. I left my mom because that was just a really difficult home life. And I didn't want to deal with it anymore. And also, I graduated from high school when I was 16 and got into college. So even though I was like really not ready psychologically for college, I jumped to the chance because that meant I could go live with my dad. And so that's what I did. But I was a bit feral. I was kind of like, I had a lot of stuff from my childhood that I needed to like unpack. Dad was just so patient with me. He let me have a lot of freedom, but he also provided structure. So it was like the antidote to my first 15 years. So yeah, I lived with Dad, then moved to New York City when I was 23. And I stayed there, had my kids. And my mom and I have always had this very on-off, difficult, like, not healthy relationship. Very, like, angry most of the time. Or, you know, sometimes it was soft, but that wouldn't last more than a couple of days. And so there's no trust. I mean, I don't know how she feels about me, per se. I just don't have any trust for her. So I would always be very like cautious about the good times, thinking, okay, other shoe's going to drop soon. But then during one of the good times, she said, hey, I want to buy you a DNA test. She said, I'm going to pay for it. You promise you'll take it and then show me the results. And I said, okay, sure. I'm curious. So why not? Oddly enough, that she wanted to do the DNA test.
What were you thinking?
I think she's kicking herself now.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you have any suspicions? Like,
no.
Why is she wanting me to do this? Or
I'd gone on Ancestry and started my family tree, and I was doing research, and I was super curious. And that's something that we do have in common is like family history. We're both really like super curious about stuff like that. And that's like a common ground for us. So we would, get together and talk about who's who in the family. And I didn't know anything about my dad's side because he wasn't interested in it. He'd tell me some nice stories about his grandfather and his father and, things like that. But he just wasn't interested in that DNA stuff. So she paid for this test, and she told me she was getting it for my brothers too, to make it seem like I wasn't the only one. But I don't think she did. I don't know. Maybe she did. Because I never even saw anything about it online. I didn't see their DNA. So I thought, well, maybe it was just me. So I took the test, came back that I got some Native American through my mom's side, and I thought it was going to be a lot more, but it wasn't. It was small blood quantum, but on my dad's side, or the side that wasn't connected to my mom, I didn't see any relatives at all that I knew their names. And it didn't even occur to me like to ask questions, because I know people's names change with marriages and whatnot. And I just wasn't that well versed, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. So years went by. Mom got to see my DNA test, and she's like, oh, interesting. Look at all that English in there. I'm like, yeah, how come it's not more? I think my dad's got some like German and other stuff, Scottish, but it was predominantly British. So years go by, and it was March 2020, and my cat had just died, and I was, already like emotionally raw from that. And I was down in the city finishing up some legal stuff with my ex-husband over child support, because all the kids had left home, so we're closing the case. And I was staying at a friend's house, and I was just hanging out on the couch, and I happened to look at the Ancestry thing because it said in an email, you have a match. So I'm like, oh, I always go check out the matches just out of curiosity. And it said it's a first cousin or closer. I'm like, what's closer than a first cousin? What does that mean? And I looked at it, and it was a name I'd never seen before. Her name is Saffron. And I thought, what a pretty name. I don't know any Saffron, but how come she's so close to me? And so I reached out to her in a message, and I said, hi, looks like we're related, but I'm not sure how. Do you know anything? And I put out some names, and she said, oh my God, my family and I have been looking for you for 15 years. Is your mom named Star? Is your dad's name Bill? And I said, yeah. And she's like, you're my mom's sister. And I said, what? I have a sister? I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, Dad, you.
Oh, so you were thinking your
I was
dad.
thinking my dad had this little like thing going on, and because they were all in Ireland, I'm like, well, maybe, on a business trip or something.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, wow, Dad. It didn't make me feel bad or anything. It was just like, okay, that's a human thing. So I'm like, okay, Dad had an affair in Ireland, and I have a little sister. And she's like, oh no, she's 10 years older than you. She's actually 11 years older than you. And I'm like, wait, Dad would have been 12? How is that possible?
Yeah, so not a business trip at that point.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I don't get it. I'm confused. How is this person my sister? And she's like, do you know the name Cedric? And I said, And she said the last name, and I said, yeah, I do. Actually, it's a friend of the family, and I've met him a few times. She said, well, that's my mom's father. And I'm trying to do the math in my head. It just isn't registering, because to me, Dad's my dad, and never even occurred to me he wouldn't be. I'm just speechless, and I start like feeling it like come up, and I'm like, my tears were just spilling over my, onto my cheeks, and I was trying to process it and feel my feelings, and there was too many feelings all at the same time. And there was anger. There was like, how could you not tell me? How could these people be lying to me all my life? And how could they hide such an important piece of information from me? It was crazy. And then like the most powerful feeling I had was, does my father know? And I mean, he must never know. I'm never going to tell him, because it would hurt him so much. And then I thought, wait a minute, he might know. They were a little bit crazy in the 60s. He might know. And so I delicately asked as many questions as I could. And my niece said, just take your time. Don't worry about doing anything or saying anything. She said, if you need a few days, if you need more time, I totally understand. She was just so sweet. And then she said, yeah, I have 2 other sisters, so you have 3 nieces. She was telling me about some family history, and she said, your grandmother, my great-grandmother, was an artist for children's literature in the 30s and 40s, and Grandpa was also an author of many books about the sea and pirates and adventures and stuff. And I'm like thinking to myself, this is magical. It makes so much sense. But at the same time, my heart was breaking, because I was thinking of my dad. I'm like, that's my dad. What do I do now? Like, what am I supposed to feel? Like, I didn't know if this was going to change anything, because I'm a daddy's girl. What can I say? And I was like, what if he doesn't know and he finds out I'm not his biological child? Is he going to not want me anymore? But I didn't think he would, because he was always very kind to my friends, and he just adopted everybody.
It sounds like it was a mixture of joy, because you're like finding out about this very artistic, creative side that maybe you identify with on some level. And then
it actually made so much sense to me.
Yeah. And then obviously the relationship with your dad. So do you tell your dad?
Yeah.
What happened?
I'm the actual, it's a cliche, but I'm the black sheep tooth teller person in my family, and I own it. I own it. It is what it is. I can't help it. Just born that way. I gave it some time, though. I had to process my own feelings and thoughts before I actually told anyone. And the first people I told were my children, because they're the coolest people I know in this world. They are so smart and accepting and worldly, and they're wise. And I said, this doesn't make anything different. Grandpa's your grandpa. And in fact, I think one of my kids said that to me. He's like, that doesn't change anything. Grandpa's our grandpa. We love him, But the funny thing is, my son looks just like my biological father. And he's a handsome man. My son's a handsome young person. And he looks like and I found out I had 2 older brothers too, but they had passed away, which broke my heart too, because I really wished I had gotten to know them. And one of the things that actually kind of pisses me off about the whole thing is I lived in England for 8 years altogether, and they were so close, and I could have met them and I could have gone to see them. My mother actually did go to see them when we were living there.
Lowe's knows that free is just better. That's why MyLowe's Rewards is free to join. As a member, you earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases, get exclusive free gifts, and earn free shipping at Silver Key status, all on top of weekly member-only deals. Don't wait. Join MyLowe's Rewards for free today and start saving more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Wow. Okay. I want to get to your mother, but first, so your father. So you're the truth teller.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, to my own detriment sometimes.
Sure. Which I think many people in our community identify with. There's something where we always felt different. We always have to speak truth and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what does he say? Like,
first I went to my mom. I wanted to get the story from the horse's mouth. I wanted to get her side of it because my sister and my nieces, she said, we've been looking for you for 15 years. So obviously they knew about me. And she said that when my biological father passed away, before he passed away, he told my sister about me. And he had a baby picture of me in his wallet when he passed.
So he knew.
He knew.
He really knew.
He knew. And he didn't want to die without my sister knowing. So he told her, he said, find her. She lives in New York. She is a model. You know, that was back in the late 90s, I guess, or the early 2000s. So, yeah, They knew about me. And he told her, this is his version. Okay, so I have 3 versions of what happened. My biological father told my sister that he was friends with this young couple in America. And this was 1962. And he's a painter. So he was painting people's portraits and painting models from life and other things, still lives and things. So he had his art studio in Pennsylvania. My dad was going to school in Pennsylvania. And so my biological father had an art show in Lehigh University. And my dad was there with my mom. And my dad bought a painting of a reclining nude. And the reclining nude was my biological father's wife, the mother of my siblings.
That's interesting.
So they became friends. They used to go to bars together and hang out. And I think my mom and father were not getting pregnant. And it was the draft. And I think it was Vietnam. My dad was up for the draft. And he didn't want to go. And my mom didn't want him to go. So Cedric said that they asked him to be the donor since they weren't getting pregnant and they wanted an artistic child. So that was the reason that I came to be, according to Cedric. And then when I talked to my mom to find out her side of the story, she said that Cedric's wife and my dad were having an affair and she was being painted by Cedric. She was modeling for him. So she did several different kinds of paintings, or he did paintings of her. And during that time, it was early 1962, I believe, they started an affair. My mom fell in love with him and she wanted him to leave his wife for her, but she was very young. And he already was he was in a relationship with his wife and they had children together. And I think they were thinking of it, him, his wife, and my dad were thinking of it as just play, fun. And my mom was 20. She probably hadn't really seen much of the world and she got emotionally involved and she really wanted him to be with her. She wanted to be with him. When she got pregnant, she went to him and he said, well, that's nice, dear. Hope everything goes well for you. That's what you wanted. I don't know if it's just different people having different points of view of what was what, or if they misled each other somehow. I don't know. But she was devastated and she was very upset. And I don't know, exactly what she went through during that time. I imagine she was pretty lost, being as young as she was. Things back then, they just did them differently because people would get married younger and have kids younger. I didn't have my first kid till I was 29.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't imagine having a kid when I'm 20.
Right. Yeah,
that's
me
a
neither.
lot.
Yeah. So that's two very different sides of the story.
And she swore she was in love with him, because I said to her, Mom, was that something you wanted? Was that, were you coerced? Were you raped? I hated to ask her that, but she said, no, absolutely not. I loved him. I wanted to be with him. So she was mad when they decided to move back to England. And so she had a choice to make. She was going to either keep me or not. She kept me. And I think she didn't talk about it. And my dad and her just didn't talk about it. But he suspected, because I don't really look like him. But he made a decision to be my dad. And he put his name on the birth certificate. And he's just always my dad.
And
never
so that's
treated
what
me
he
any
said.
differently.
He said that he suspected.
Yeah, he did. It was such a hard conversation to have with him. He'd just come back from Mexico. He was recovering from his first bout of COVID, and he was doing okay, but he was not as strong as he used to be. It was very hard to actually get him into a situation where I could bring it up, because my stepmom was always around and I didn't know if she knew, and I didn't want to embarrass him. So I decided I was going to try and talk to him by himself. So we went grocery shopping and we were in the car about to go back, and I was just digging so hard to find the courage to actually ask him this question. And I said, I gotta ask you something, Dad. Don't drive just yet. Don't move. Let's go. Let's sit here for a minute. And he's like, "What is it?" And I think he was thinking, "Are you sick? Are you okay?" Because I don't think it was on his mind at all. And I said, "Dad, I hope I'm not the first person to tell you this, but I found out that Cedric's my biological father." And his head went down, and he closed his eyes. And he said, "Oh." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter to me. You're my dad." I said, "I just wondered if you knew." And he said, "I did. I kind of suspected, but it doesn't matter to you." I said, "No, it doesn't. Not at all." And I said, "You're my dad, no matter what. You're my children's grandfather." And he said, "Okay, good, because it doesn't matter to me either." So we got to have that conversation. Although, like looking back, I think my mom was dropping hints over the years. Like every time she'd get mad at me about something, and I don't know, like she'd just say things like, "Yeah, maybe your dad's not your dad," and then I'd say to my dad, I was like, "Did you know mom said that you might not be my dad?" He's like, "Why would she say such a thing?"
Wow.
And
did she ever reveal why she wanted you to take a DNA test if she wasn't 100% sure? It sounds like she was sure. So then why did she have you take the test?
I think it was just for her. It wasn't for me to find out anything. I think we were both pretty naive about how these tests work. And because I wasn't looking for anything, and I think she was. And if she had bought DNA tests for my brothers and had them take it, then I would have found out they were my half siblings.
Right.
And I didn't find that out until after my dad passed, because one of my brothers did take a DNA test and I found out he was my half sibling.
So he was your birth certificate father's son?
Son, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
He has 2 sons with my mom.
Okay. So whatever fertility issues that Cedric was claiming maybe were not necessary. So what story do you believe? I mean, I know you'll never know for sure, right? Because you just have to go off of...
I think my dad's story was, it was the 60s. That's what we did. We were just crazy. We played.
Yeah.
We wife swapped, whatever, and things happen and whatever. You just sort of deal with the consequences in the best way that you know how. Not that he saw me as a consequence. He just saw me as like innocent, and I was a product of something that they all decided to do.
Right. And then your mom, she got feelings involved. She
had feelings for my biological father. She wanted to go with him. She's romantic. She's a very like romantic person, and she romanticized the situation, thinking like, we're intimate. We have these beautiful moments. There must be love there. Let's build on that. Then when he very wisely said, dear, I have a family. We're going to England. This was planned already. And I'm sorry that you feel that you were misled, because that's not the intention. But she was, okay, there's a huge age difference too. Let's say he was born in the same year as my mother's father. So,
okay.
Yeah, he was older. He was born in 1915 in May, and my grandfather was born in 1915 in September. So I asked her about that too, and she's, you age is a number. I don't feel 60. I don't really subscribe to the
60.
notion.
I was shocked when you said that. When you said you were a model, I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Well, yeah, I don't subscribe to the whole age thing, but I'm amused by it. I'm amused by the whole age thing. Like it can be fun to like play with numbers, thinking, okay, my dad's older than my grandpa.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think my mom sees the humor in that.
Sure.
I'm not trying to hurt her or put her on blast. I just want the truth to come out.
Yeah. So once you got all three sides of the story, and you are in a great, position with your birth certificate father, you agree, like, he's still your dad, you still love him, he kind of knew and he didn't care. I'm sure that was reassuring. But how are you feeling once you're kind of contending with this secret and this change to your identity?
My next step was, okay, now my parents know that the cat's out of the bag. The truth teller's on a mission. I decided that I would give it a year. I was going to give my mom an opportunity to tell her story. We talked a few times on the phone. I said, Mom, you're 80 years old. You have lived a life, nothing to be ashamed of. Be honest. Don't be ashamed. Tell your story. It's interesting. It's fascinating. I'm curious. I'd love to know more. She told me a little bit more stuff, but she's like, no. I would never want anybody to know. I'd be mortified. She's got a lot of shame issues, I think, from her childhood, probably, because they were raised in this religion where you just couldn't do anything but be perfect. And if you weren't, you're a sinner. So I don't know. So, religion kind of messes people up.
And I just think
sometimes.
And there's just so much shame with the moms in these stories. It's really sad.
It is. And they're a product of their times, too. I mean, just as an example, my first child, I was leaving her father. We were getting divorced. And I went and had an affair or fling with an ex-boyfriend. And she was conceived around that time. And I just thought, I'm not sure who the dad is. And I told everybody, I was like, I'm going to find out, but I'm having this baby. And then I told her when she was younger, it's like, at first I didn't know who your dad was, but you look just like my husband. So you're his, definitely. And she, she's heard the story. So I don't have that kind of shame. And maybe that's a testimony to the times I was raised in, or, seeing how my mom was so afraid of people finding out that, she'd done things or she wasn't perfect. I wanted to be her champion and say, hey, I support you if you want to tell this story. So I gave her a year. Then my next step was, all right, I'm going to go to each of my relatives that I have a good relationship with, who I care about, and tell them in person, because I'm about to put some of this stuff on Facebook because it's part of my story, and I use Instagram and Facebook like a diary, like a journal. It's not to complain about the world or anything, but it's like, okay, my thoughts and feelings. These are pictures of things I've done, whatever. And I wanted to claim my sister. I wanted to claim my nieces. I wanted to claim my legacy of being from a family of artists. And my mom was trying to swear me to silence, and I wasn't going to. Absolutely not. After being lied to for the first 57 years of my life, nope, my turn. I'm saying something. Not to be malicious. So first I told my brothers, and my my younger brother's reaction was, "Oh, well, that's interesting. Guess our parents had some fun, didn't they?" So he's like, "Yeah, you're still my sister, no big deal." And I said, "If you want to tell my other brother, who was not with us at that time, he was in Rochester," I said, "You can call him up, tell him." And he did. And everybody was like, "I didn't see that coming, but I'll take it. It makes sense. It explains a lot of things." And then I went to my uncle, told him. And every time I told somebody, I said, "Look, I'm not telling you because I'm trying to tear my mom down or to be a gossip. I'm telling you because it's my story now. And I don't think mom really wants to talk about it. So be aware not to bring it up. She's very uncomfortable with the subject. Even talking to me about it, she's uncomfortable." I said, I felt protective of her. I don't want her to be hurt. But I was also processing my own pain over this. And part of processing my own pain was to tell people, to let people know the truth, that I'm okay with it. I had a wonderful dad. I found out I have a sister. I've always wanted to have a big sister. Like, now I have a big sister. I have nieces, beautiful nieces. They're all artistic. They're all very interesting. They live in Ireland. One day I want to go visit them. I was actually going to jump on a plane and go visit them, but it was COVID, so lockdown. Nobody was going anywhere.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think this idea of, in this digital age, sharing on social media really is a step to like reclaiming our story and really saying, like, this is who I am. I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, it's just Facebook or Instagram. Like, who cares? Why do you need to put that out there?" But it is a step in, saying this is who I am and this is what has happened to me. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. After I told my relatives up in the Adirondacks, and then I told one of my cousins, and they were just so cool about it. They were like, "You know what? That makes sense. We love you, and you're just who you are. You're our cousin. You're our niece, whatever." And then one of them called his sister, who's also my cousin, and said, "Guess what? Big news." And he failed to tell her, "Don't contact Star. Don't contact Julie's mom." She went straight to her phone and texted my mom, "I know something. I know the big news," or something. And I'm sitting in the living room with my mom at that time because I was visiting her. And she looked at me and all the blood went from her face. She said, what's she talking about? I said, "I'm telling everybody about Cedric." And she said, "Get out of my house. You're the most selfish person I've ever met." And I said, "I'm sorry, Mom, but taking half of somebody's family away and keeping them from half their family, that's also selfish." And that was the last time we really spent time together. She's still mad at me. And I understand, because it didn't go the way she wanted it to. And, she feels humiliated. She feels like I betrayed her. But she's not putting herself in my shoes either, because I was betrayed too. And it's not revenge. It's like claiming my truth.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry that happened. How long ago was that?
Must have been 2 years ago. Last time I saw her was at my uncle's funeral, and I tried to give her a hug, and she pulled away. So that's the last time I saw her.
How are you dealing with that estrangement?
We've been estranged so many times over the years. This is just one more time. It's not fun. Of course, I would love to have a good relationship with my mom, but I don't see that happening until she decides that's what she wants to. I'm okay with that. It wouldn't have been something that I'd want to deal with repeatedly, like this getting close and then being estranged, getting close, being estranged. It's like, okay, I've decided to go no contact for as long as it takes. If it's going to be always, then it's going to be always. I have plenty of people in my family that do love me, and we have good bonded, relationships. And I understand. I have empathy for her. I feel for her too, but I'm not sure she's feeling what I'm feeling. Can't hold on to your shame forever.
Do you still have any questions for her that you want answered in regards to, your origin story or questions about Cedric?
Yeah, sure. I want to know more about him. I want to know lots of stuff. Like, she did give me some information, and then when I said something to her that was kind of like bratty. I said, now maybe you can have a good relationship with your bohemian bastard love child.
Do you think that the secret created conflict between you two, even though you didn't know that it existed?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure she's regretted having me many, many times over the years because I have been a challenging person in her life. And we're like baking soda and vinegar. We get together and there's an explosion.
Okay. Okay. So what have you been doing to process this and work through? It sounds like you've made beautiful connections with your Irish family.
Yeah. I wrote to my sister a lot and wrote to my nieces a lot. One of my nieces sent me this amazing DVD of old home movies that my grandfather, who was like an amateur filmmaker, made of my biological father when he was a child. And all the way up until adulthood and maybe his like 20th birthday or something. And my grandmother, and I could see their faces. I could see how they moved. It was a silent movie or a silent, film. There was no talking in it. And then there was like a part of the film where my grandfather was making faces into the camera. He was doing all these like crazy, and I'm like, that's my face. That's my face.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, I make those faces too.
Oh my God. Especially for the time. Like, I feel like a lot of people probably don't have that. You said your father was born in 1915?
15. And my grandfather was born in 1888.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's a fascinating family story, like that whole side of the family. My great-grandfather came from Scotland, and I think he met my great-grandmother in Nottinghamshire, and they lived there for a while, and they had 2 children. Then they came to the States, and right around the time when it was after the Civil War, it was when the railroads in full effect. They'd pretty much gotten rid of all the bad outlaws, like the Old West badasses. And so he went out to Washington State and started a wheat farm. And he was like a land baron. He was a mason. And then my grandfather he didn't want to do farming. So he became a wanderer, and he was an artist. He went back to England, and he went to college over there for art and met my grandmother, and they were both in art school. And then they became like well-known artists for their time. And then they had one son, my father, and he's an artist too. I have a tattoo of one of his drawings. He did this book called The Cats of St. Ives, and I put together some of those and made a tattoo about it.
That's stunning.
My grandmother, I have another one. There's a mermaid.
That is so cool.
That's a drawing by my grandmother. So I'm like embracing it. I just love the whole story. One thing my mom said to me is, don't romanticize it. And I'm like, I have to. There's no way I'm not going to romanticize it. Like, that's how you get through life. You don't look at the bad side of things. You look at the beautiful side.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good way to put it.
Yeah. If you look at the bad side, you're just going to spiral.
What's next for you in your journey?
Well, I'd love to go to Ireland and meet my sister and my nieces. Obviously, that would be highly desirable. I'm working on writing a book of living on my bus for 3 years in New York City and the adventure of that. So now I'm at this point where, like, I came from this artistic family who wrote books and illustrated and traveled, and I have to claim that. I have to say, okay, I'm part of that now. Like, it makes sense. Like, I've always had the urge. I have literally like 5 or 6 suitcases full of journals in storage right now, just sitting there from 1973.
How would you say that I don't even know if I could use the word overcame the shame, because it seems like you've never attached shame to it. And I think there's like these generational aspects for sure, but then there also just seems to be some connection to shame for the moms. So for you, did you just never feel any sort of shame?
I'm shameless.
Okay. I love that.
I think what happened was I saw how shame affected people when I was growing up. Like, ooh, what are the neighbors going to think? Ooh, don't say this, don't say that. In fact, this reminds me of when we were living in England and I was 11 years old and I was told that I had to tell everyone that Phil, my stepfather, was my real dad. And I had to use his last name. I had to call him dad or he wouldn't answer. And I had to kiss him goodnight every night. And I hated him. So I didn't have shame. I had anger. And I saw all this came out of all these things that I was forced to do came out of someone else's shame. So I was determined that I was not going to be ashamed of anything that I did or said or chose. And I'm not.
I love that. I love that. You're like my hero right now.
Aw. It's your life, and this is your story, so you get to do what you want with your story. You can romanticize it, you can unpack it, you can tear it apart, you can elevate it, you can do whatever you want with it. It's your story.
I love that. I love that. What advice do you have for a parent who may be keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
Make it part of their story. If from the very beginning, tell them right from the get-go, do not lie. Do not lie to your child. Do not lie. I think I told my child a lie once and I felt horrible about it. She asked if I ever smoked pot and I said no. Because I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this question. What do I say? She's 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, what do I say? What do I say? What would my mom say? No. And that was the stupidest thing ever because she actually said something to me later. She said, you remember that time you told me you never smoked pot? I'm like, honey, I just didn't know what to say. And of course I have.
What advice do you have for someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise?
Go at your own pace. Be calm about it. It's definitely a life-changing experience. It's going to uproot everything you ever thought about yourself forever. Like, you're going to unpack stuff for the rest of your life. I'm still unpacking stuff.
Julie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. It was amazing to hear. You've had an incredible life, and thank you just for sharing your perspective on your DNA surprise. It sounds like, it's something that can be very difficult, but it's wonderful to hear the beauty that you found in it.
Yeah, well, I think I got another 40 years to go, so...
Thanks again to Julie for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprisespodcast.com. Until next time, this episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auersalt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auersalt of Siren Recording Studios.